Welcome the anointed ones. Never mistake a calm surface for still waters. There's always something dangerous moving underneath. They thought you were harmless because you smiled. They thought you were soft because you stayed silent. They thought your kindness was your core. Oh, bless their clueless little hearts. Here's the truth. You weren't sweet. You were strategic. And now? That strategy is unraveling in front of them like a Netflix thriller they didn't see coming. Except you're the plot twist, the lead role, and the final scene. Let's be honest, some people are just now realizing that your so-called nice personality was less about innocence and more about insurance. You weren't trying to be lovable, you were lowering their guard. And it worked. Spectacularly. Psychological fact. People often assume that kind individuals are less intelligent or less capable of retaliation. It's called the warmth-competence trade-off, and you've been flipping it on its head since day one. While they were testing your patience, they were unknowingly auditioning for judgment. But now the curtains are being pulled back. The chosen one they thought they could control, yeah, that version no longer accepts bookings, because someone's realizing, a little too late, that your sweet side was never your truth, it was your trap. And trust me, they're not prepared for the one who's about to emerge. Let's talk about it. Number one, your kindness was a decoy, not a personality trait. They thought your kindness was just who you are. They had no clue it was part of the plan. You didn't show up sweet because you were naturally soft. You showed up that way because you understood the game. You knew they were the type to only respect power once they've disrespected peace. So you gave them the bait. You let them see what they wanted. Someone agreeable, quiet, harmless. You played the part so well they never thought to question it. That smile you gave, it wasn't a reflection of how you felt. It was a mirror to expose who they were. You were never trying to bond. You were gathering data. You let them talk, lie, perform, thinking they had you wrapped around their ego. Meanwhile, you were studying every move, every inconsistency, every mask they wore. Your kindness was your way of keeping the battlefield clean, while the war quietly raged inside. They saw politeness. What they missed was precision. You weren't being nice, you were watching. You were building files in your head, remembering everything they thought you'd forget. And now that they're losing access to that version of you, the panic is setting in. Because the moment they realize your sweetness was a setup, not a submission, is the moment they realize you're 10 steps ahead and they can't backtrack their behavior. They underestimated you because they measured you by the tone of your voice instead of the strength of your silence. They assumed kindness meant consent. That was their biggest mistake. Because you didn't show them who you are. You showed them what they could handle. You held back the storm so they wouldn't drown. And now that the storm's coming, all they can do is remember how safe they felt when you were faking it. You were never the nice one. You were the quiet storm that gave them a chance to run. They stayed. Now they're about to find out exactly who you've been all along. Number two. You mastered emotional camouflage because survival demanded it. You didn't learn to be sweet because life was gentle with you. You learned it because life forced you to be clever. You figured out early that being too strong, too honest, too direct would make you a target. So you developed emotional camouflage. You toned down your truth, dimmed your fire, and became what people felt comfortable around because survival demanded it. Your sweetness wasn't your personality. It was your armor in disguise. When you're a chosen one, your spirit carries weight. It can disrupt a room without you saying a word. People sense it even if they don't understand it. So instead of dealing with the tension your presence naturally brings, you gave them something lighter, softer, easier to swallow. Not because you needed their approval, but because you knew exactly how they'd react if you showed up as your full, unfiltered self. They were never dealing with the real you. They were dealing with the version of you that kept the peace while you read the room. You were observing patterns, decoding hidden agendas, and measuring intentions. Every nice moment was layered with analysis. Every soft response had a motive. You weren't trying to connect, you were trying to calculate. Your sweetness was a mask with a purpose, to keep you safe while you studied the field. They thought you were gullible. They thought you were passive. They had no idea that the person they thought they were taking advantage of was dissecting their behavior like a surgeon. They played games, not knowing you saw through the rules before they even finished the first move. What they called naive, you called surveillance. And now that you're dropping the act, they're starting to realize it was never an act of love. It was an act of war. You didn't become kind because you trusted people. You became kind because you didn't. And now that you've outgrown the need to pretend, your true energy is surfacing, and it's nothing like what they thought they had power over. Number 3, they confused your restraint with lack of power. They mistook your restraint for weakness, like you were scared to speak up or incapable of fighting back. But the truth is, you were just calculating the fallout. You were holding yourself back, not because you didn't have the power, but because you understood what would happen if you unleashed it. You weren't scared. You were strategic. You knew your words could cut deeper than theirs ever could. You knew if you responded the way you really wanted to, the damage would be irreversible. So you stayed quiet, not to protect yourself, but to give them space to stop. What they never realized is that your silence was never empty. It was full of warnings. Every time you held your tongue, it wasn't because you didn't know what to say. It was because you were choosing not to say it. You were giving grace, not because they deserved it, but because you were measuring how far they'd go before they exposed themselves. And they did. Every time. They kept pushing, kept poking, kept testing you, thinking you didn't have it in you to push back. They thought you lacked strength because you didn't retaliate. But your kind of strength doesn't shout. It doesn't beg for attention. It holds the line and watches. That's what scared them, on a level they couldn't even explain. Because the ones who've really been through darkness don't need to prove how dangerous they are. They carry it silently. And when pushed too far, they don't react. They transform. Now they're starting to see that you weren't quiet because you were scared. You were protecting them from what you could become. They confused your boundaries with fear. They thought your patience was a personality trait, not a warning sign. But that version of you, the one who held back, who played nice, who tried to keep the peace, is fading. And what's coming next doesn't play by their rules. They're finally starting to understand. You never lacked power. You just didn't feel like wasting it on people who didn't deserve the fallout. Number 4. Your sweetness was a strategic stall, not a permanent state. You were never trying to be liked. You were buying time. Every soft laugh, every calm tone, every gentle response was a carefully timed delay. A stall. You knew exactly what you were capable of. But you also knew that dropping the full weight of your energy too soon would have destroyed things prematurely. So you dressed the storm in sweetness. You gave them the version of you that kept things quiet, even when you were fully aware that chaos was overdue. That side of you, the sweet one, was temporary. It was a placeholder, not a personality. You weren't being fake. You were being calculated. You knew people couldn't handle the unfiltered you, so you gave them the safe version, the one that made them comfortable enough to relax their guard. And when people get comfortable, they reveal themselves. That's what you were waiting for. Not an opening to attack, but the full unveiling of their character. You didn't need to guess who they were. You let them tell on themselves while you smiled and nodded. They assumed you were sweet because that's all they saw. They never realized you were holding back out of discipline, not deficiency. It takes real power to remain calm when your spirit is screaming to shut things down. You didn't evolve into dangerous overnight. You didn't wake up one day and grow a backbone. You've had one this whole time. You just chose not to use it on the unworthy. Now they're panicking because they're finally realizing what that sweetness was hiding. It wasn't innocence, it wasn't peace, it was fire under pressure. They never thought the storm was coming because they assumed the sun was permanent. But the warmth was a warning. And now that it's gone, they're standing face to face with what you could have been the entire time. You didn't change, you just stopped delaying. Number 5. You weaponized grace to keep the battlefield silent. You weren't being graceful because you lacked options. You were being graceful because you had too many. You knew you could destroy them, expose them, call them out loud and clear. But instead you chose grace, not because they deserved it, but because it gave you room to maneuver. Grace kept the noise down, and when there's no noise, you can hear everything, every lie, every motive, every insecure jab disguised as a joke. Every move they made thinking you were too nice to notice. You noticed, you just didn't flinch. Grace became your disguise. While they were busy performing, you were planning. You weren't trying to maintain peace. You were creating silence long enough to study the enemy's next move. They thought your politeness meant they had power over you, but you weren't submitting. You were setting the board. They thought you were scared to fight back. But you were just making sure they walked far enough into the trap that there would be no way out once it snapped. That grace they loved so much, that softness they depended on, it was never about keeping them comfortable. It was about keeping you in control. Because if you had reacted too soon, you'd have shown your hand. But by staying silent, calm, composed, you let them build their own downfall. Brick by brick, you gave them the rope and they tied the noose. Now they're stunned because they can feel the shift. They can sense the sweetness is gone, but they don't remember crossing the line. That's the power of grace. It doesn't raise its voice. It raises the stakes. Now they're walking straight into spiritual consequences they never thought they'd face. Not because you cursed them, but because they cursed themselves by abusing your grace. And the worst part for them? You still haven't raised your voice. You still haven't made a scene. But everything around them is starting to fall apart, because grace might be quiet, but it never forgets. Number 6. You let them misread you because it gave you the upper hand. You saw it from the start. The way they sized you up, assumed things, reduced you down to something small and easy to manipulate. And instead of correcting them, you let it happen. You didn't argue, you didn't protest, you didn't try to prove who you really were. You knew it was better to let them build that false version of you, because while they were busy drawing up a harmless cartoon in their heads, you were taking notes on their language, their insecurities, their patterns, their ego. You knew the story they were writing about you wasn't true, but you also knew the bigger that lie got, the more blind they'd become to the truth. So you fed it. You played along. You nodded when they underestimated you. You smiled when they threw shade disguised as jokes. You let them think they were smarter, slicker, more in control. And the whole time, you were gathering exactly what you needed, the blueprint to every weakness they thought they hid. They thought you were predictable, simple, soft. But really, you were collecting evidence, watching how they behaved when they thought they were superior. Your sweetness wasn't just a mask, it was a spotlight. It brought out their worst, it exposed their real nature. And now that the illusion is broken, they're scrambling. Because the person they built in their mind doesn't match the one standing in front of them now. And they have no idea how to defend themselves against the version of you they never bothered to understand. They made the mistake of thinking they knew you because they controlled the narrative. But you were never in their story. You were the author of your own. And now that you've stopped pretending, they're trapped in a plot twist they never saw coming. The sweet one was a setup. The real one is a force. And their miscalculation? That was your strategy. Now it's checkmate. Number 7. You built a gentle persona to expose the brutal ones. You didn't show up as sweet because that's all you had to offer. You showed up that way to observe, to test, to see who could handle someone pure without trying to poison them. You gave people a version of yourself that was open, giving, grounded in integrity, not because you needed their approval, but because you needed to see what they would do with it. Would they honor it or exploit it? Would they protect it or see it as an opportunity to feed their ego? Your kindness was never meant to reflect them. It was meant to reveal them. It wasn't a mirror. It was a net. And now the ones who thought they were pulling strings are finding themselves tangled in the very trap they thought they were setting for you. They underestimated how surgical your approach really was. While they were busy performing kindness, you were testing character. And the results are in. Some of them failed miserably. They thought your gentleness was naivety. They thought your softness meant they could take and take without consequence. But you were watching. Every time they ignored boundaries, every time they twisted your words, every time they acted like your kindness made you disposable. You weren't blind. You were collecting proof. And now they're exposed. Not just to you, but to themselves. Because it's hard to pretend you're good-hearted when your actions are being held up next to someone who never stopped being genuine. What they're feeling now isn't guilt, it's fear. The mask they wore so confidently around you is slipping. And it's not just that you see through them, it's that they know you've always seen through them. You let them walk right into the truth with a smile, and now the mask is coming off. For both of you. You're done pretending to be sweet. They're done pretending to be innocent. What's left is the raw, exposed truth, and not everyone's going to survive it. Number 8. They thought you were the lamb, not the shepherd with the sword. They thought you were harmless because you carried peace. They looked at your calm demeanor, your forgiving nature, and assumed you were easy to silence, manipulate, or walk over. They thought they were dealing with a lamb, someone too soft to fight, too spiritual to strike, too holy to defend themselves. But what they didn't know is that you were never just the lamb. You were also the shepherd. And you don't just watch over peace. You protect it with a sword. You chose mercy not because you didn't see what they were doing, but because you wanted to give them space to stop. They mistook that as weakness. They thought your faith would keep you passive. But they don't understand the kind of power you walk with. Your spirit doesn't just radiate light, it's connected to judgment. You carry divine authority. And when the line is crossed, that authority doesn't just pray, it acts. They expected you to fold under pressure. They thought you'd forgive blindly and let it all slide just to keep the peace. But they forgot something critical. You don't serve peace at the expense of your soul. You guard it, you fight for it, and when necessary, you'll draw the line that cuts through darkness like a blade. They weren't ready for that part of you, the part that's backed by heaven, that doesn't speak empty threats, that carries the weight of generational fire. You didn't want war, but you're not afraid of it either. And now, the ones who thought they were hurting someone defenseless are realizing they've been striking at someone protected. Every move they made in secret, every word they whispered in manipulation, it was all seen, documented, remembered. And now that you've stepped into that shepherd energy, they're facing something they weren't prepared for. Consequences. They underestimated you because you didn't look like a fighter. But warriors come in robes too. And when the divine calls you to rise, you don't come swinging wildly. You come with precision, justice, and spiritual fire. The lamb was the front, the sword is the truth, and now they know. Number 9. Your sweet side was the last barrier before the switch flips. They didn't realize that your sweetness wasn't a personality, it was a shield. A final barrier between you and the version of yourself that doesn't tolerate games, doesn't sugarcoat truth, and doesn't stick around to clean up anyone else's mess. That smile they used to enjoy, it doesn't feel safe anymore. Now it feels sharp, distant, unnerving. Because they can sense it, the flip is coming. And the person behind that smile isn't the same one they used to underestimate. They thought your kindness was your ceiling, that you'd never go beyond it, that you'd always be soft-spoken, always be forgiving, always be the better person. But your sweet side was never a weakness, it was a threshold, a place where you gave people room to correct themselves, to shift, to change their ways. And once they passed that point without any accountability, the barriers started breaking. You didn't scream, you didn't lash out, but something shifted. The energy changed, and they felt it. Your smile no longer reads as warmth, it reads as a warning. Because it's not covering grace anymore, it's covering decisions. You've made up your mind, they're just the last to find out. And that's the scariest part for them. Not the words you haven't said, not the wrath you haven't released, but the way you're calmly detaching, quietly stepping back, slowly stepping into your full power, without explanation. They don't fear your anger, they fear your clarity. Because once that switch flips, you become immune to every trick, every guilt trip, every fake apology they've ever used to reset the game. There's no going back once you reach this version of yourself. The one who doesn't just see through people, but also refuses to play small to protect their feelings. They were warned. Every act of kindness was a test. Every moment of grace was a countdown. You weren't being passive, you were being generous. Now the generosity has ended, and the version of you that's arriving doesn't ask questions. It walks away, cleans house, and never looks back. Number 10. Your softness was spiritual collateral in a ruthless game. You weren't being soft because they earned it. You were being soft because you refused to let them drag you into their level of filth. You gave compassion as a spiritual investment, not as a reward for good behavior. While they were trying to provoke you, bait you, and get a reaction out of you, you stayed grounded. Not because you were blind to the disrespect, but because you understood something they didn't. Your soul was always the real prize. You knew the game was rigged from the start. They wanted to break you, stain you, twist you into a version of yourself you'd hate later. So you didn't play by their rules. You chose softness, not to protect them, but to protect your divine alignment. Every time you chose grace over pettiness, silence over chaos, understanding over revenge, it wasn't for them. It was for your own spiritual preservation. You were playing a long game with heaven, not a short one with fools. And now the board has shifted. The rules have changed. The time for being the bigger person is over. Not because you've run out of kindness, but because the game has entered a new phase. You gave what you needed to give. You passed the test. You kept your hands clean while theirs got dirtier. And now the softness that once served as your offering has been pulled from the table, not out of bitterness, but out of spiritual closure. They're confused now. They don't understand why the version of you they once fed off is gone, why the warmth they exploited has evaporated. But the truth is, you're not in that phase anymore. You were never being soft for their comfort. You were doing spiritual accounting, balancing your karma, checking your motives, making sure you didn't lose yourself in the process. Now the energy has shifted. The currency isn't kindness anymore. It's clarity, power, and divine justice. You didn't stop being sweet because you changed. You stopped because the transaction is complete. Your soul is clean. The lesson is learned. And what they're dealing with now? That's not your wrath. That's just the consequence of trying to cheat someone who was playing chess with God. Number 11. They forgot angels know how to go to war too. They mistook your light for fragility. They saw your peace, your empathy, your ability to forgive, and assumed you were built to bend, not realizing you were built for battle. Just because you walk in love doesn't mean you don't carry wrath. Just because you extend grace doesn't mean you lack judgment. You're not some fragile being floating through life untouched by reality. You're an angel trained in warfare, and when your name is on heaven's roster, passivity is not your assignment. You weren't sent here to make people comfortable. You were sent to confront systems, expose liars, break chains, and disrupt generational darkness. You were never meant to play small just to keep the peace. Your light was meant to disturb what hides in the shadows. You weren't sent to set the table for snakes pretending to be saints. You were sent to flip it, loudly, righteously, unapologetically. They wanted you to be soft, silent, agreeable, but you were never meant to be palatable. You're prophetic. You move with divine instruction. Sometimes that means speaking love. Other times that means shaking foundations. And when you shake things, it's not out of rage. It's out of alignment. They didn't understand that your light isn't passive. It burns. It exposes. It disrupts. You didn't come here to dance around evil. You came to dismantle it. Now they're shocked. Now they're uncomfortable, but they shouldn't be. The signs were always there. The power in your silence. The strength behind your eyes. The way your spirit carried a weight they couldn't name. What they failed to realize is that angels aren't just messengers of comfort. They're warriors of truth. And when the mission calls for it, they don't whisper. They roar. You don't carry feathers. You carry fire. And now that you've stopped playing small for their comfort, the room's getting hot. That's not by accident. That's your calling waking up. And it doesn't ask permission to set the record straight. Number 12. They were addicted to your kindness because it covered their shame. They clung to your kindness like it was oxygen, not because they respected it, but because it allowed them to keep hiding. Your sweet side gave them a safe place to be reckless. You didn't call them out. You didn't expose them. You let them live in the illusion that they were good people, simply because you didn't react to the bad things they did. You absorbed their attitude, tolerated their jabs, carried their moods, and for a while they convinced themselves they were still decent because you didn't shatter the mirror they were hiding behind. They weren't drawn to you because they loved your light. They were drawn to you because it kept their own darkness unbothered. You never had to shame them. Your presence alone did the work. Your kindness made them feel accepted. But that feeling was dangerous for someone who refused to grow. You gave them a soft space. And instead of healing, they used it as a place to keep misbehaving without consequence. But that version of you, the one who made excuses for their behavior, who let things slide, who kept the peace even when your peace was being drained, is gone. And now, the silence feels different. The room feels heavier. The absence of your sweet side is exposing everything you never had to say. They're not just uncomfortable, they're unraveling. Because without you holding up that false version of themselves, they're finally seeing what they've been hiding from all along, their own reflection. You didn't have to punish them. All you had to do was step back. And the guilt they've been avoiding is now filling the space you used to protect them from. They're suffocating. Not because you attacked them, but because you're no longer buffering the truth. Your kindness covered their shame, and now that the covering is gone, they're left with exactly what they've earned. And it's not pretty. What they called peace was actually your silence. What they called love was your self-control. Now that you've pulled it back, they're left with themselves. And that's the one thing they never learned how to face. Number 13, your sweetness was a mirror. They just didn't recognize the reflection. They thought they were outsmarting you, getting away with little jabs, passive-aggressive comments, lies wrapped in charm. But what they were really doing was revealing themselves. Your sweetness didn't blind you. It revealed them. Every time you responded with grace instead of anger, every time you extended understanding instead of retaliation, it didn't mean you didn't notice the disrespect. It meant you were giving them a chance to see themselves through you. But they never looked closely enough. Your kindness was never weakness. It was a mirror. And what they were seeing, the ease, the warmth, the empathy, wasn't just about you. It was reflecting back everything they weren't. That's what made them uncomfortable deep down, even if they couldn't name it. Your integrity reminded them of the parts of themselves they buried. Your self-control exposed how reckless they were with their words. Your patience put their manipulations under a spotlight they couldn't turn off. They mistook the softness as naivety, but it was contrast. You were the calm to their chaos. You didn't need to expose them. They did that all on their own by standing next to someone who didn't need to lie, pretend, or perform. And now that you've dimmed that light, pulled back the warmth, shut down the connection, their own depravity is naked in the room. There's no light to hide behind, no kindness to soften the mirror. And they're finally having to face what they were using your presence to avoid. You didn't come to play them. You came to reflect something higher. And instead of rising to it, they projected onto it, mocked it, took advantage of it. And now that the mirror is gone, so is their disguise. They're sitting with their own mess now, fully exposed. Not because you embarrassed them, but because you stopped letting your light distract from their darkness. The irony? They thought they were studying you. But the whole time, they were just being shown to themselves. And now that there's nothing left to reflect, the truth is louder than ever. Number 14. You've retired the sweet version, because the real you has resurrected. You didn't just change, you shed an entire version of yourself. The sweet version wasn't fake, but it was strategic. It was your protective gear in a world that didn't know how to handle someone like you. You wore it to survive, to study, to move undetected through environments designed to drain, provoke, and silence you. That version smiled through tension, kept the peace when it hurt, and made itself small just to avoid unnecessary war. But that version has served its purpose, and it's done. What's rising now is not a nicer version of you. It's not the healed, gentle, soft-spoken return everyone expected. It's the real you. The one that doesn't flinch, doesn't shrink, and doesn't explain. The one that doesn't need permission to speak, set boundaries, or walk away. This version of you is spiritually weaponized, fueled by clarity, backed by divine authority, and impossible to deceive. They don't miss you. They miss the access. They miss the version of you who gave the benefit of the doubt, who absorbed disrespect without pushing back, who tolerated the chaos in the name of love or peace or not making it a big deal. That version kept doors open. This one shuts them and locks them for good. The fear they feel now isn't about you becoming mean or cold. It's about the fact that they no longer have the tools to manipulate you. The emotional buttons don't work. The guilt trips fall flat. The power dynamic has been reversed, and they can feel it. You didn't grow distant, you grew aligned, and alignment doesn't entertain dysfunction. You didn't get bitter, you got resurrected. The real you has returned, not the cautious character you built to survive, but the untouchable soul that knows exactly who they are and what they carry. You're not rising to prove a point. You're rising because that's what divine timing demanded. And those who fed off your sweetness are terrified, because now they're facing the version of you that was never supposed to be hidden in the first place. They thought your sweetness was your identity, but it was your disguise, a brilliant, strategic, spiritually grounded disguise. You gave people the version of you that kept them calm, gave them comfort, and let them believe they had control. But all the while you were listening, calculating, absorbing, watching. And now the act is over, not because you're angry, but because you're awake. You didn't lose your softness. You evolved beyond the need to use it as a shield. That sugar-coated version of you was never the full truth. It was the mask you wore while navigating treacherous waters. Now the storm has cleared, and what's stepping forward isn't a victim. It's a force, one that no longer minimizes itself to be understood or accepted, one that no longer offers grace where there is no accountability. The old you made people feel safe enough to keep harming you. The real you make people reconsider every choice they made in your presence. And that shift isn't just transformation, it's reckoning. The light you once used to comfort now exposes. The silence that once protected now roars. You didn't come to entertain egos. You came to fulfill a spiritual assignment, and the part of you that tolerated being misunderstood, manipulated, or underestimated has been retired permanently. What's rising now is a divine original, fully aware, fully aligned, fully armed. Let them call it a change. Let them say you're different. Because you are. You're not who they met. You're who you were always meant to become. And now there's no going back. You were never just sweet. You were sacred. And sacred doesn't bow, it ascends. If this message lit something up in your spirit, don't keep it to yourself. There's someone else out there who needs this same reminder. That sweetness is not weakness, and that rising into your full power is a holy act. So if this resonated with you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Like the video, drop a comment below, and let me know which part spoke to your soul the most, and most importantly, share this with someone who's been playing small for too long, just to keep the peace. We're building a community here for the real ones, the bold, the chosen, the spiritually awakened souls who are done hiding behind polite masks. Your voice, your presence, your energy is needed in this space. So don't just watch. Join the movement, subscribe, like, comment, share, and step fully into who you are. You're not just here by accident, you're here on assignment. Let's walk it out together. God bless you.